I'd like to call to order the special meeting of the Avalon City Council for Tuesday, April 18th. May we have the roll call, please?
Mayor Marshall,
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Ponce,
Here.
Councilmember De La Rosa,
Here.
Councilmember Lavelle,
Here.
Councilmember Schickling.
Here. We're going to be going into closed session. It's conference with legal counsel on anticipated litigation.
And this is under initiation of litigation pursuant to paragraph 4 of subdivision D of section 549, 56.9. And there are no members of the public that would like to speak to this, so we'll go into closed session.
Okay? We're back from closed session. Does anybody want to say anything? We're back from closed session.
No reportable action.
Okay, and we will close that meeting, and we will open the Avalon City Council meeting, which will also include a meeting of the City Council acting as the Housing Authority for Tuesday, April 18th. And you need to take roll call again, I guess.
Mayor Marshall?
Yes, here?
Mayor Pro Tem Ponce?
Here.
Councilmember De La Rosa? Here. Councilmember Lavelle? Here. Councilmember Schickling?
Here. Will please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. And begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And if we could please have a few moments of silence for Nathan Parrish. Please be seated. Are there any announcements or written communications?
No, ma'am.
No? Okay, department head report?
Good evening, Bob Greenlaw, Director of Public Works. Got two items tonight. The Green Pier, the power replacement of the Green Pier is now complete. Project went very well. We had 8 days of actual activity on the pier required to replace those 5 pilings. In the future, we have about 35 more to complete that will be done over a period of 5 years. That's what we have our permits for. But that's a good glimpse, that project's a good glimpse of how it can be done and the access requirements when that work is being done. And then on Five Corners, got good news that SCAG, Southern California Association of Governments, at the last meeting approved the ATP Cycle 6 grant application for the Five Corner project. It is now forwarded to the California Transportation Commission for final approval in June. This will provide an additional $3,238,000 in funding for the project, besides what we have for Metro. So that's really good news.
That is great news. Any questions? Okay, thank you.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, members of the City Council. April is a month of preparations as we ready our fleet and crews for the summer. Since the new year, we have trained 2 more personnel as EMTs and added 4 Harbor Patrol officers to our part-time staffing, which we are now in the process of training these patrolmen. The city and float received its annual service at Larson Shipyard and was towed back to Avalon last Friday. We plan to install that float on Monday, May 1st. Since my last report, Tuesday, April 4th, Patrol moored 329 boats for a total of 1,335 nights. Patrol did 122 security checks of the facilities and surrounding waters. We're seeing with the better weather, we're seeing increases in the amount of traffic that's visiting us, so I'm really appreciative of that. Any questions? Thank you.
Did we go out to try to get some trash boys?
We're trying frantically, so
Yeah.
the ads are out and the pay looks good, so if anybody wants to come down and work on the water, we're looking forward to putting a crew together for summer.
Yeah, great. Okay, thank you.
Good evening, Mayor, Council, City Staff. Michael Alegria, Fire Chief. Start with code enforcement. DMV was here. It was packed in here every day. Them being here during vehicle season was huge. Something was wrong at the front counter. Rocio send them in here. They'd be in here for a half hour, and go right back, and it would be done. So that was great. They also had a lot of kids taking driving tests or permit tests, so that was a huge increase. So they're very busy and look forward to coming back, and they expect a lot of driving tests to be done in October.
Yeah, excellent.
As far as the fire department, I attended the National Fire Academy last week in Baltimore. Did a class on leadership, on community risk reduction, on how to reduce some risk in our community. I did it on wildland fire risk in our community, Had some of the members of the class say, "How do you sleep at night?" As we showed them some of our pictures and talked about being out on the island. It was a great class, great experience to be at the National Fire Academy, taking that with some really good instructors. And I look forward to sending some of my guys out there each year to go out and take classes.
Great.
Other than
Question?
that, any questions?
We're good, thank you.
But Orrin, I had a follow-up question for you, though. I was just curious, are there any qualifications for anybody to do the trash boat? Do they have to be trained, just know how to drive a boat?
It's
It
on the
helps,
city
definitely.
website.
What?
It's on the city website, the qualifications, and it's posted. but
Oh, okay.
Yes,
All
yes.
right.
Thank you. And
Thank you.
main thing is have that school permit to work, and that helps tremendously to have that
Okay,
ahead of
cool.
time.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor,
Thank you.
County Council, city officials. Since the last time I was in council, we had 35 calls for service. We had 101 self-initiated observations by the deputies. We made 3 arrests. 2 of them were for public intoxication, and 1 was for battery. We had about 5 citations written, and I've spoken to the school this week, and we have 12 students signed up for the shortstop program that starts on the 9th. And we have meetings, or we have sessions on the 9th and the 23rd. It looks like we're good to go there. And I also spoke to the school as well as Steve Bowie regarding the driver's training. And it looks like it's really just a funding issue. They don't have the money to hire some outside source to come in and do that. And it's very difficult, being that we're on an island and there's no one trained here that we know of that can do that at this time. So it's just kind of a tough spot for us.
I'm sorry, but do we have any idea what that dollar amount would be?
I don't know. They didn't give me an amount.
Okay.
It has to come out of the school's budget, out of this school, because everybody's got their own budgets, and that's how it is. So,
I mean, this town is pretty good about raising money, though, for a good
Yeah.
cause, so something like that might be possible at some point.
okay. And I'm still waiting on a call back from Steve as well. He's kind of working on some things, and he'll get back to
Great,
me.
excellent.
The casitas have been completed. We have our personnel back inside. They moved back in over the weekend, and we're very excited about that. It's been a long time, and they're very happy. So all we're waiting on now is the air conditioners to be installed, and we're done. So
Excellent.
it's great. That's all I have for this week, or this meeting. Anybody have any questions?
Has there been any movement on the internet services for you guys? Is that getting better, or is it still the same right now?
I'm sorry, ma'am?
The broadband services?
No, it's been pushed back and pushed back and pushed back. Apparently, initially they expected to be 3 towers, microwave towers, to complete the connection.
Okay.
As of right now, they're telling me it's going to be 5 towers. So they have given me a date of June. But
Is it time, or would it help if we called anyone to help push that along, or is there anything we can do to assist?
I don't think so. It's one of those things where it's a project that's ongoing, and they have the right crews working on it. It just takes a great deal of time. We have kind of a workaround a little bit where we're using the island's data, and we're logging on through an encrypted service. But we don't get all of our stuff we need, but we do get a lot of it. So it is helping us a bit. But yeah, we're excited about that happening. Hopefully in June, and I'll be
Yeah.
jumping up for joy
Yeah,
when that
please.
does happen, because it's going to be a great advance for us. It
Yeah.
really is. Looking forward to it.
I know you've been a little understaffed. Are you having any luck?
Yeah, we have, in June, we're gonna have a new watch deputy starting, taking Dina's place, who retired about a month ago. And we have a new deputy. He's a Carson deputy. He's a veteran from the Navy. He'll be starting in June as well. And then we have a new dispatcher that will be starting on June 21st as her initial start date. And she'll be working the early morning shift. So we'll have 4 dispatchers at the
Oh,
station.
good. I know that's been tough. That's hard to do when you're,
Yeah,
staffed down,
and
so
then we anticipate some of our injured personnel to be coming back in the next few months as well. We don't know exactly
Okay.
when, but it should be happening.
Good, good.
Yeah, I'm excited.
Yes, I bet you are.
Yeah. It's, right now we have guys, you know, I'm sure everyone sees the same people on the street constantly because they're working around the clock because our personnel is so short right now.
Yes, yeah, okay. Well, good, that's good to know. Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, City Council. Matt Baker, Finance Director. I don't have any update other than the presentation, but just wanted to see if there are any questions. All right, look forward to speaking later tonight.
Thank you.
Good evening, Council and Madam Mayor. Earlier this month, I attended the CPRS training. That's the California Parks and Rec Society, their conference, and took several classes there and got an opportunity to learn about what they call reconomics, economics in the park and rec field, as well as some of the latest things that are happening and the trends that are happening within our department. Also, I was able to, through their expo there, be able to network with quite a few companies, especially as we're moving towards finishing up the shade structures or at least going out for bid for those. And it's really nice to see that there's a lot of companies that are moving forward with more art designs within their shade structures. And so I think there's some really good things I'll be able to bring back for you to see with our shade structures within the next month or so.
Great.
The Easter egg hunt was a huge success with over 300 participants from 0 to 17 years old. We also walked through town with the Easter Bunny and passed out another 100 bags of candies to kids along the front street. We would like to thank Catalina Island Company for partnering with us to make this event happen at beautiful Descanso Beach Club. We also had the Kite Festival last Saturday. We had moved it from March to April because April is the official kite month, even though we had 1 mile per hour winds on Saturday. It was not as well attended as it has been in the past, and we seem to believe it's because most of the families who've been coming up, because it's during Easter break, a lot of the families weren't there, they were elsewhere, so we're looking at maybe moving it up to the first weekend in April next year to have a greater success and more wind, hopefully. Boys and Girls Youth T-Ball signups are open now. This is developmental league for 3.5 to 8-year-olds. They will learn how to throw, catch, bat, and run, leading up to gameplay. T-ball starts May 15, with signups happening now at the cityofavalon.com website. Please join us this Saturday to make Avalon more beautiful on Earth Day. Community cleanup will be April 22nd, the Saturday from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. at Avalon Kids Park. Trash bags, gloves, grabbers will be provided along with refreshments and pastries. Again, this Saturday from 9 to 11 over here at the Avalon's Kids Park. Speaking of cleaning Avalon, Tony Zeiler has been doing it longer than anyone else has in this community. Mr. Tony is the best example of an individual who has taken pride in keeping Avalon beautiful, and we believe would be a perfect fit for our Grand Marshal in this year's 4th of July of Green Island in a blue ocean. So all in favor, say aye.
I love it.
Is there any other questions?
Nope.
No?
Very good, thank you.
Thank you.
The wind did pick up in the afternoon, though. I took my granddaughter up there, and she flew a kite for the first time and had a blast.
Okay, so was that it for city staff? City manager report?
Thank you, Mayor, Council. First of all, I just want to thank Paul Novak from LAFCO, spent the day here with us today. Scott Campbell and I, Assistant City Manager Jocelyn Francis, and Bob Greenlaw, looking at city facilities, city property, and Scott will address that a little more specifically of what that all means in his report. I also would like to thank Conrado Vega and Cartopia. They donated 2 used golf carts to the city that were being taken out of service by them, but they're definitely needed by us. we have them here at City Hall. We're able to use those. It was much appreciated. As the chief indicated, vehicle registration season is over. We do have a few specific vehicle registration issues we're working through. Some folks or some specific vehicles or situations that didn't really fit into the existing code. We're trying to work through to find out what we can do or not do with some of those vehicles. But for the most part, it's over. Extending it 2 weeks, I think, was a great idea. That was suggested to have that coincide with the DMV. So going forward, I think next year that's something we'll just plan on doing because it made a lot of sense just to extend that through the DMV's April visit. And finally, I just want to mention, I think the chief mentioned it, the increase in the teenager registration for license. I just want to thank the sheriff's office because their enforcement of those provisions certainly led to that a couple weeks later, and I know they did that on with the understanding the DMV would be here, and it worked. So it was nice to see. Once they see that enforcement is out there, compliance, I think, soon follows. So, you know, going forward, we'll keep an eye on doing the same thing. And then finally, I just want to bring, I know council's aware, just the public's attention, we have a joint council meeting with the chamber this Thursday, April 20th at 1 p.m. here at City Hall. We anticipate it'll be a productive meeting between the two groups. I don't believe we've done this before, and before the emails start, yes, I know we scheduled a joint meeting on 4/20. That was accidental. It's just a quirk of the calendar, but it's already been brought to our attention. So here it goes.
That's why we were going to be so cooperative, right?
Right.
There'll be brownies served.
That's it. Thank you.
Great, thank you. City Attorney?
Two things. First, for many years, Isaac Rosen has served as Planning Commission counsel. Isaac was recently appointed as city attorney of the city of Arroyo Grande, which is near Morro Bay in the area. So he will be replaced by Scott Shapes, who has been helping with planning issues for last year. And then we did spend today with Paul Novak from LAFCO. Paul is joining us tonight at the City Council meeting to observe. Wave for the cameras, Paul. And so we're looking at two things periodically. LAFCO looks at the scope of city services. So it's, you know, an overview of the services and the industries that serve our citizens and our residents. It's part of their overall just review of municipal services. In addition to that, there's a sphere of influence study that they do usually concurrently with that. And that looks at are there areas that are in the city's sphere of influence? In other words, areas that maybe provide services to the city. Looking at areas like the industrial area, the Farness City, and are those something that, you know, the city should have within its sphere of influence, so that in the future, if the city ever wanted to try to incorporate those areas into the city, it has to be within the sphere of influence. So it's just part of a survey that they do every 5 years or so to look at what is the appropriate sphere of influence for the city. And so we toured a large part of the city today as part of this beginning process.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you. Okay. Council member reports?
Nothing from me.
Lisa?
So after our last council meeting, Councilmember De La Rosa and I met with Selena Luna from Edison and Congressman Robert Garcia and his staff, and took them around town a little bit. Thank you to Chief Alegria for meeting us with the fire engine downtown. That was fantastic, and we appreciate it. And had some opportunities to just talk about some of the needs and requirements, including U.S. Postal Service, the SAFER grant that the fire department is going after, and a few other things like that. So I think overall it was a productive day for everybody that got to meet with them. And then met with Recreation with Dave Hart, and also with Love Catalina for the T-Mobile Hometown Grants application process. T-Mobile offers a $50,000 grant to be able to go after funding for things that bring community together, that bring people together. And so we thought that a number of things on the Front Street that are already kind of in the purview of the city might be appropriate to go after some of those funds. So we're putting together that application shortly.
Wonderful. Excellent. Yesenia?
Not much for me this week, just like Lisa mentioned, we were able to take them around town. I do appreciate the fact that they went and met a lot of workers, shook their hands, asked them about the island, how they're living, great questions. So I think they left with a good understanding of how our town works. Besides that, I'm meeting once again with Lorianne from US Bank. So hopefully within our next meeting, I'll have a good plan of what the financial literacy workshop will look like, and I can share that with you guys. But that would be it.
That's great.
Nothing.
Okay. I don't know if everybody knows, and I don't remember. We're getting some planning assistance from someone?
Yes. We contracted with Sagecrest for planning.
Okay, excellent, okay. And just to let you know, the VeriSign guy called me yesterday. I tried to get back with him, that didn't work, but I left a message today, so if he calls again, I said it was okay to do avalon.gov, is that what we're looking at?
avalonca.gov.
Yeah, okay. Somebody already had the avalon.ca.gov. And I just want to do a shout out to Becky Hinckley. She's retired after working 35 years at Vaughn's, and I think that's pretty awesome. So anyway, when you see Becky Hinckley, thank her very much. I will not be attending SCAG. I don't know if anybody else from the city is going to be going. I don't know if you decided to go or not, Mr. Maestros.
No, that's nice to know. So.
Oh, okay.
I'm the alternate.
Okay. Oh, so he couldn't go?
Huh? No, I'm the alternate. I think they can go, but
okay.
I'm the alternate
representative.
representative.
Okay. Because it said mayors and city managers, but then he would, so we get the free enrollment, and then if he went, he'd have to pay.
Yeah.
That's how it goes. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Because you guys appointed me.
That's right. It's been a while. Yes. Lester. Okay, here we go. And we're going to oral communications. This is opportunity for people from the public to speak on items that are not on the agenda. You will be limited to 2 minutes and no action will be taken.
Mayor Marshall, I've received one communication.
Okay.
Dear Mayor and council members, I wanted to thank David Maestros and Matthew Baker for presenting data regarding short-term rental saturation in the city of Avalon, and for the first time including the residential communities of Hamilton Cove and Bahia Vista. Several residents of Hamilton Cove reviewed documents at the Coastal Commission offices in Long Beach. I will forward to you copies of documents for your review. In May 1980, the Coastal Commission, as a condition of approving the development of the residential community of Hamilton Cove, required 25% short-term rentals. Hamilton Cove has 68% STRs. We don't have the staff or infrastructure to manage what has now become a hotel. The city of Avalon has close to 50% STRs. The Coastal Commission voted 12-0 in support of the County of San Diego to limit short-term vacation rentals to 30%. The Coastal Commission is relying on the city to manage saturation issues. The negative impact of STRs on the citizens of Avalon is well documented. Why not consider a hold of granting transient rental permits until issues are addressed and solutions are implemented? Oversaturation affects citizens and visitors. The City of Avalon Municipal Code law requires signage for each short-term rental. However, short-term rental owners in Hamilton Cove have been exempt. To my knowledge, there have been no amendments to the municipal code granting dispensation to short-term rental owners in Hamilton Cove. Is the council going to abolish this code requirement, or amend the code, or enforce the code? This housing element report submitted to the California Department of Housing included several new single-family residences built in Hamilton Cove. Several of these homes have been converted to duplexes and awarded multiple transient rental permits. Don't these actions make the City of Avalon out of compliance with state housing guidelines? Every time a transient rental permit is awarded, housing is removed from citizens to rent. Can the city use funds from the housing plan to lease homes for residents? Most importantly, we need to consider the cost of loss. The loss of residents who move from the island because of lack of housing, the loss of employees for businesses, the loss of occupied homes, the loss of a community. Residents of Avalon are going to be put on the endangered species list. We have an opportunity to fix it. We will send by separate email information on what other cities have accomplished in resolving the issues of short-term rentals impacting the health, safety, and welfare of their citizens. Thank you. Kate Redden, 95 Pla Izul.
Thank you.
Alrighty, so if there are no oral communications other than that, we will go to presentations.
Good evening, City Council. This marks kind of the first of our budget discussions for the upcoming fiscal year 24 budget year. The focus of tonight's presentation is going to be on the estimated beginning reserves heading into next fiscal year, as well as kind of our preliminary revenue estimates that we're using as the basis as we're developing our operating and capital budgets for next year. This slide should look familiar. It's one I've included now in a number of presentations. Again, the city strives to have a structurally balanced budget. By that we mean our operating revenues exceed our operating expenditures. Revenue estimates should be conservative. I think in the last couple of years they may have been too conservative, which is you can be. And so one of our goals with this budget is, while still maintaining conservative revenue estimates, try to make sure we're more aligned with where we think we actually will end up, because we want to paint a fair picture of kind of where we expect our reserves to be heading into the next year. Again, one of our goals is to be transparent in our forecasting, and so the purpose of this presentation is to try to explain how we came up with the estimates that we're using while building the budget. The next bullet's just a reminder that we should be using the new revenues to make sure we're covering our current existing operations before dedicating new revenues to new projects or new services. And then lastly, just a reminder that this is kind of a working document. We are actively meeting with department heads, going over operating budgets, and the numbers will change as I get new revenues in over the next few months. But this is where we're at today. Again, the next slide is a comparison of actual general fund revenues over the last 4 fiscal years. I just want to highlight fiscal year 19, as that's the last full year before COVID, before any impacts of COVID, and you can see that our TOT revenues are around 5.4 million, and our total revenues about 11.5 million in the general fund. And if you compare that with fiscal year 22, we had TOT revenues of 8.7 million and total revenues of 16.4 million. So that's approximately a 60% increase in TOT revenues comparing fiscal year 19 to 22. And that 5.4 million increase of total revenues, 3.3 of that is TOT, and then another 900,000 is the ARPA state and local fiscal recovery funds. So that's really, to highlight, TOT really is the driving factor for the revenue increases we've seen as a city over the last 4 years. So the next slide is a breakdown of actual revenues through March. And you can see that we've received to date about 5.6 million in TOT revenues compared to the 5.7 million we budgeted. So, in the last few meetings I said, well, the winter weather hasn't been great for numbers. I haven't been, terribly concerned, and that's partially because we had such a conservative TOT revenue figure. But it also highlights the importance of making sure we have a conservative figure because, things like weather are out of our control. So we need to make sure we're prepared for situations like that. So the next slide here shows kind of a low-end estimate of where I think our revenues will finish for the year. You can see TOT is estimated to finish the year at a low end at about 7.4 million. I'll show you how I came up with that number on a later slide. The other TOT revenues, or the other revenues, are more aligned kind of with the pre-COVID levels. This is kind of the basis for how I came up with those. And then just something to note, in the other revenues, it also does include the Measure H collections, as well as I have a separate line for the sales tax from the hospital. If future presentations, I might pull those out. The reason I include them in is for financial statement reporting purposes. They roll up into the general fund, but really from a budget perspective, it's money in and money out, and that doesn't really reflect spendable funds. So I may pull that out in future presentations, but I just wanted to kind of draw attention to that. And then lastly, this is the high-end revenue estimates. You can see TOT at a high end, I could see being as high as 8.4 million this year. Again, I'll show you how I came up with that figure. 8.4 million is down from the high of fiscal year 22 of 8.7 million. The other larger number that I wanted to highlight is our city sales tax number of 1.45 million. That's the current estimate our sales tax consultant has provided, so that's what I've used as kind of the basis as a high-end estimate for sales tax. And sales tax and TOT combined make up 2/3 of our general funds revenue. So again, this is a breakdown of TOT revenues received and how I came up with the low-end estimate. So you can see in February our TOT was down about 40%. We did have some late payments come in, so I expect February to end somewhere between down 30 and 35%. But I took that down 40% to represent kind of the worst case scenario and applied that to March through June numbers. And even if March through June are down 40% from what we did last March through June, we'd still finish the year with 7.4 million in TOT. On the high-end estimate, I do anticipate March, just given the weather and given everything and some of the early reporting I've seen, not to come in at last year's level. So I estimated it down 20%. It's kind of the high-end best-case scenario for March. And then for April, May, and June, I said, what if we hit close to, but not quite, what we did last year in fiscal year 22? So if we were to finish the last quarter strong and nearly match what we did last year, we could be as high as 8.4 million. I would suspect we're going to come somewhere between that 7.4 and 8.4, but likely closer to the 7.4. So in later slides, I use a number around, I think, 7.7 million for TOT for the current fiscal year. So the next slide here is a breakdown of kind of the operating revenues, net operating revenues. So that's taking our operating revenues and minus our operating expenditures. So we started the year with the beginning reserves around 12 million. Our operating revenues in the budget were also about 12 million. Using the low end estimates, revenues would come in at 13.7 million. Using the high end estimates, revenues could be as high as 15.8 million. I took the operating expenditures as in the revised budget with the updates we did at mid-year and just assumed we would match our budgeted amounts for year end. So if we spend everything that's in the budget, and you can see the operating expenditures do go up in the low and high, and that's because some of the revenues are tied, or some of the expenditures are tied to revenues. So if TOT goes up, the chamber allocation also goes up as well. So you can see on the low end, we could finish the year with net operating revenues of 1.5 million. And at the high end, 30.2 million. Again, this is before any capital spend or transfers to other funds. We do have a lot of planned capital spend in the current year budget. A fair amount of it, though, I do expect won't actually occur in the current fiscal year. Looking at it today, I think likely about 500,000 in net spending won't occur in this fiscal year, and so we should finish with reserves between that 12 and 13.8 million, but realistically it'll be between 12.5 and 14.3 million, and that largely depends on the revenues of where we finish the year in that regard. And so again, just to kind of put this into perspective, pre-COVID we were looking at reserves around 5 million, so it really is remarkable, how far we've come in such a short time. So this is a chart that I've pulled from our audited financials for harbor operating income over the last 10 years. I just wanted to highlight that from 2016 to 2020, we had operating expenses in the harbor exceeding our operating revenues. But last year in fiscal year 22, I should apologize down there, it's calendar year it looks, but it's actually fiscal year. In fiscal year 22, our operating revenues exceeded our operating expenditures in the harbor by 2 million. Just a couple things to note there. We did enter fiscal year 22 with negative working capital. So essentially we had no reserves in the harbor. As well as there was minimal CIP activity in fiscal year 22. And so while we had a really strong year, we also didn't have as much spend as we were still kind of pulling out of some of the post or some of the COVID cost saving measures. But it's definitely a strong turnaround in the harbor as well. On this slide, this is a comparison again of harbor operating revenues from pre-COVID fiscal year 19 all the way to the current year through March 31st. And so if you direct your attention to the highlighted or the circled numbers at the bottom, through March of last year, we had 5.8 million. And through March of this year, we've collected in harbor revenues 6.2 million. So our overall revenue number is up 5%. But really that's entirely attributable to cruise ship wharfage. So last year, cruise ships really didn't resume in earnest till October. But even then, we saw decreased occupancy through the spring months on the cruise ships. So as of March 31st of last year, we'd only collected 150,000 in cruise ship wharfage, but through March of this year, we collected 857. If you take cruise ship aside, most harbor revenues are down from where we were this year, but that's similar to what we've seen with the TOT on the prior slides and the ad tax and the general fund. But the reason overall revenues are up is it's being driven by that cruise ship number. So the next slide shows where I estimate harbor revenues to finish the fiscal year. And my estimate has them more or less in line with where we had budgeted them to come at. I just wanted to kind of call out kind of the importance of not budgeting against our best year ever. And so last year we finished cruise ship wharfage for operations portion at 2.7 million, but we didn't budget our revenues to match that high. And so even though we have had a rough winter and revenues have been down the last few months, they've been down relative to last year's actuals, but not to this year's budget. And so we're still in line to meet our budget estimates for this year. So you can see we had estimated total revenues in the budget in the harbor to be 8.25 million. But right now I estimate they'll come in closer to the 8.79 million. And again, that's attributable to our cruise ship wharfage. Last year, when we built out the budget, we were still in the spring, and occupancy rates on the vessels were 50% full. Mm-hmm. And really, for the entirety of the year, we've seen 100+% full vessels. And so that's really what's driving that increase in revenues in the harbor.
If I can just ask a little question, and maybe it's only with one of the carriers, is one of them paying us no matter how many people get on and off? Right?
How the Muni Code is written, it's based on the manifest passengers, so it's regardless of whether the passengers get on or off.
Yeah.
I have heard that our disembarking rates are slightly higher than industry averages, which is a positive thing. That means the cruise ship passengers want to come on and see our town and see the island. But I want to say the industry average is 60-some% of the passengers get off at any given destination, but I believe we're higher than that number.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
I'm sure Jim in the chamber could give you more details, but I do think we outperform a lot of our competitors in that regard.
Nice.
This next slide, I just took out the fuel dock revenues, and that's because in fiscal year 19 we operated the fuel dock, so that kind of inflated the total number. So I thought it would make for an easier comparison to take them out. And again, this is just to show that our cruise ship wharfage in the budget, we had estimated revenues to be $1 million, but we expect them to come in over 1.4 million this current fiscal year. So again, the harbor entered the year with about 1.3 million in working capital. Revenues in the budget were 8.2 million, but we actually expect them to come in closer to that 8.76 million number. So if our operating expenditures meet our budget numbers, we'll have net operating revenue in the harbor anywhere between $1 million and 1.5 million. And again, that's before any capital spend, and there's no shortage of that in the harbor. So in the budget, we had about 2.3 million in planned capital spend in the current year in the harbor. About $1 million of that relates to Mole Phase 2, which we won't expect to see until the next fiscal year 24. And so while if you take the mid-year budget and you take the budgeted revenues, we'd basically be entering fiscal year 24 with no reserves. And if we spent everything that we planned to spend on the budget this year, we'd be entering with that 400,000 number. It's actually probably going to be entering next year anywhere between 1.3 and 1.8 million in working capital in the harbor, and that's because the entire 2.3 million we had in the budget for planned spend in capital, we're not going to spend it all this year. So we will have working capital entering next year.
And that's working capital, not meaning salaries and that kind of thing.
So that's the working capital is if you take all the current assets, so mainly cash or short-term receivables, minus all of the liabilities at the end of the year, the short-term liabilities. That's the amount of funding you have available to spend on other items. So that's it's you can think of it like reserves.
But not just for capital improvement.
It wouldn't necessarily be for capital improvements.
Okay,
You could
that's
also
right.
have reserves for, you know, if just say we had a year and operating revenues weren't as high as we expected.
Right.
So they wouldn't necessarily, but there are a lot of capital needs and planned capital spend in the harbor. This slide also might look familiar. It's one I borrowed last year, at least the chart on the left. This I used from Visit California and Tourism Economics, and it shows total visitor spending in California using 2019 as the baseline year. They had 22 reaching 93% of kind of the pre-COVID 2019 calendar year, with visitor spending in California expected to exceed 2019 levels in calendar year 2023. The next slide looks at it though from a real spending, and so a lot of the total spending it includes the inflation, the cost increases. So if you look at actual when factoring for inflation, the actual tourism spending in the state, they don't expect that to reach pre-COVID levels or 2019 levels until 2025. And if you look at our numbers, it's stronger than state averages. It's not really an apples to apples comparison here. But what I did is I took the total visitor-driven revenues in Avalon, and you can see in 2021, our visitor-driven tax revenues and fees exceeded our 2019 levels by 16%. And in 2022, our visitor-driven tax revenues and fees exceeded the 2019 levels by 37%. And that compares to the 93% in spending statewide. So again, it's not a perfect comparison, but it kind of gives a general sense that our visitor spending is outpacing the state average. Again, this next slide looks at total number of visitors coming to the island compared against the total visitor spending. And so you can see that our visitor counts did go up in calendar year 22 compared to the pre-COVID calendar year 2019. But visitor levels went up by 7%, but our tourism spending went up by 37%. And so what that tells me is a lot of that growth in our revenues came from increased per visitor spending. And that was likely from increased costs of hotel room, costs of just increased costs from inflation. So now that's kind of where we are heading into the year. I decided to update some photos since we have some great ones on the website now. So looking at the upcoming fiscal year 24 budget, right now these are the numbers we're working with. We're looking at TOT of approximately of 7 million estimated. So again, fiscal year 22 we did 8.7 million in TOT. This year we expect TOT to come in somewhere between 7.4 and 8.4 million, but for budgeting purposes, right now at least we're using 7 million as our estimate. And so that's down about 8% from where I expect the current year to finish. So I said earlier I expect the current year to be, I think, 7.65 million. So, you know, it still is significantly higher than what we budgeted this year, but still below where we expect to reach this year and well below where we reached in fiscal year 22. And again, the reason why we're going a bit higher with that number is we really want to try to reflect while still being conservative where we think we could achieve, so council has and the public have a better picture on where we're at from a reserve-wise and budget-wise. The sales tax numbers I got from our sales tax consultant and rounded down, so they came in with their estimate about 1.47 million, but that's when we'll get an updated number between now and when we actually adopt the budget. The other one I just want to draw attention to is property tax. There's a component of our property tax that it's a residual and pass-through property tax. The short of it, it makes it difficult for me to come up with an estimate, so I always err on the side of caution there. So in the last few years, our property tax revenues have been about 1.7 million from various property tax sources. I have it budgeted at 1.5 million, but I do think that's a conservative figure and likely will be closer to that 1.7 that we've seen in fiscal years 21 and 22. So again, you can see we are using 13.7 million as kind of our operating revenues. And again, that number is important because we want to make sure our operating revenues exceed our operating expenditures, so we present a balanced budget for adoption. So the next slide, what I tried to do is look at if we were to enter the year with reserves. Sorry, I didn't look at reserves on this slide. I said if we had that 13.7 million in operating revenues and assume our operating expenditures increase by 10%, other than the ones tied to our revenue, in which case they increase by whatever the revenue estimate was, what would that mean for a net operating income? So again, if all our operating expenditures were to increase by 10%, given those revenue estimates, we would still be looking at net operating income of $500,000. Again, that $500,000 would then be needed to spend on capital needs in the general fund as well as any transfers to other funds. Again, I'm not saying we're going to actually be increasing all our operating expenditures by 10%, but I just wanted to provide kind of what a picture of what that would look like. So similarly in the harbor, if we're looking at the budget, more or less I'm having the harbor revenues remain flat to this year with the exception of cruise ship wharfage. I've increased that to be more aligned with the occupancy rates that we've seen over the last year. Even that number I have kind of rounded it down. Potentially cruise ship wharfage based on the current schedule could be as high as 1.6 million, but I have that number to make sure it's a number we feel confident we can hit. So if we estimate that our our harbor operating revenues this year to be 8.76 million, kind of as a working number in the budget right now, we're looking at operating revenues of 8.64 million from those various sources. So you can see it's relatively flat with a couple exceptions. So how I came up with the cruise ship wharfage, since that's the one that has changed the most from prior year estimates, I thought it was worth providing a breakdown. So I took our current schedule for the second half of 2023 and the first half of 2024. And we have 118 ships currently scheduled. And if you compare that to 2019 arrivals, we had 113. So that's an increase of 5 ships compared to that pre-COVID number. But again, that 118 assumes no cancellations and no additions, so that number could change. But that's what we currently have in the schedule. We took the capacity based on assuming a double occupancy. So it's not to get too in the weeds, but sometimes it's difficult to know how many passengers could be on a ship. But the industry standard is to use double occupancy, and so that's what we've done to come up with the capacity number there. We assumed a 90% occupancy on the ships. We've actually seen occupancies 100% plus for the majority of the year with what's been reported to us. But just to leave some room for cancellations or changes in rates, right now I'm using 90% as that number. So again, if you do the 90% of the capacity and you times that by the rate, the total would be 1.49 million. For the budget, I just rounded down to 1.4 million. You can see that the number of passengers would increase in this scenario from 262 to 298, and that's largely driven by some of the boats having a larger capacity in anticipated in fiscal year 24 compared to pre-COVID fiscal year 19. And that's kind of what we've seen, some larger ships coming to town already. We have had 2 ships come with passenger counts reported to us over 4,000. And so that was the first time, at least since I've been here, we've had a ship over 4,000. So we have done that and managed that successfully. So the operating income in the harbor, if we use that 8.64 million and kind of keep the same assumptions of operating expenses increasing by 10%, not to say that they will, but just using that as kind of a baseline, we would have operating expenses of 8.01 million and net operating income of 624,000 in the harbor. You know, while great that 624,000 would be needed for capital spend, and there's plenty of capital spend in the harbor. Again, I don't want to focus too much on that bottom line number because we're still developing the operating budgets. I just wanted to use that 10% as kind of a baseline to show where we're at. So I don't want to dwell too much on that number, but I just want to point out that if our operating expenditures did increase by that, we still would be presenting a balanced budget from an operating standpoint. And then lastly, I just wanted to quickly touch on the other enterprise funds, so our sewer, saltwater, and solid waste. So this slide is what the adopted cost of service study had for scheduled rate increases over the 5 years. I don't want to dwell on this slide for too long, only because last year, rather than the 19.5% increase, we only increased solid waste rates by 11.5%. And what we're kind of working on as a number as we're developing the budget for next year is to kind of spread out those increases. So rather than have those steep increases, to have a 7.5% increases in solid waste. And again, that rate increase in solid waste was driven by increased costs due to SB 1383, as well as increased funding for landfill closure and post-closure, and also increased funding to look into landfill expansion to hopefully alleviate future costs affiliated with the landfill down the road. Again, saltwater and solid waste for next year would be increasing by, or excuse me, sewer and saltwater would be increasing by 3.5% and 2.5%. You know, a lot of our contracts are tied to CPI, but unfortunately, when we developed the cost of service study, inflation wasn't at the levels we're currently experiencing, but those are the rates we have, and that's what we're working in. So we're just being very mindful in our operating expenditures to try to make those revenue numbers work. But that is kind of one of the challenges with developing a study 5 years out is the world can change a lot in 5 years. So again, the highlighted ones here are what we're right now looking at, you know, for the development of the budget. We will be bringing to council for adoption, like we do every year, the sewer, saltwater, and solid waste rates. So we can have more discussion on this, but these are the numbers right now we're looking at and working with. And this is just to recognize where I was pulling some of those California visitor statistics numbers from. So what?
I just have a
with that, if there are any questions.
So, how do we grow our reserves? Because it doesn't seem like we're really growing reserves. We're kind of maintaining, pretty much, or half a mil here or there. But
I mean, I'd say the answer to that is we have grown them considerably. In fiscal year 19, so heading into COVID, we really only had reserves in the general fund of around 5 million. And so now we're talking about reserves between 12 and 14 million.
Right.
And some of how we've done that is by budgeting conservatively as far as how we've built out our operating budgets. And so when we do have, if we're assuming this year TOT comes in at 5.7 million in our budget, but when it comes in at 7 million, you know, there's 1.3 million that we don't have any planned spend for, and that goes to building our reserves. So, you know, part of how we do that is just trying to make sure that we're budgeting our operating expenditures kind of within, you know, at a conservative level. So when we do have record years like we did in 22, we're able to really build reserves and take advantage of those years.
I mean, do you think maintaining the 12 or 13 mil or whatever in reserves is adequate for a city our size? Or if you, in your perfect world, Matt, how much of that should we have?
I mean, so I could, in my perfect world, So generally, and it's really a city-by-city basis, generally, most cities look at 6 months of operating expenditures as an adequate reserve level. And we were close to that pre-COVID. We were probably 5 months of our operating expenses. The challenge is our revenue sources are just more elastic than other cities. And by that I mean a lot of cities are very dependent on things like property tax that aren't really going to fluctuate, at least fluctuate downward in most years. But being a tourist town and having most of our revenue driven from visitors to the island, we're always going to be tied, for better or worse, to the economy and also the how much free spending people have to come here and visit us.
Right.
So that being said, I think our reserve should be higher than the average city for that reason. And it's a question we could debate of what is that number. I mean, we definitely are in a lot better position today than we were 4 years ago. And so I'm looking at where we're at now, I feel a lot better than where we were at 4 years ago. And how we got there is we really just didn't rely on the great years we had. We really budgeted for an average year, if you will, and then when we had the great years, we were able to use that to build the reserves. And so that so far has been working for us, at least in the short term. But it's a great question. Just because we are so tied to visitors, I think it's important that we have a healthier or bigger reserve than what other cities would have.
Interesting. Thank you. Any questions of Matt? Once again. So when are we going to look at, oh, this is a terrible question. When are we going to look at things like fees and rates other than sewer, salt water, and stuff?
So we will be bringing back the miscellaneous fee schedule, and maybe it's a discussion we can have next meeting when we talk the operating budget. What we really should be looking at also is a cost or a rate study for our miscellaneous fee schedule.
Yeah.
We haven't had a formal one in quite a few years, and so that would really achieve some of the goals we've had with looking at our vehicles, looking at
Right. Okay.
but right now, kind of the plan for the budget discussions is this one is to really try to set the tone of
course.
what we have going into next year and what we expect from next year. The next meeting we should be looking at the operating budgets, and so for that one, we'll have a slide like we did last year for each department, and kind of looking at what the asks were for each department. And our goal is to highlight any significant changes from last year. Again, with the understanding it's a working document and things we might be presenting might change. And then the second meeting in May, we're looking at for our capital discussion. But again, that doesn't mean if there are capital needs that we should be capturing in our CIP plan, we can always have those discussions at any time. And it can even be an email saying, when are we going to remodel the bathrooms on the pier or something along those lines. So
Okay, put it on the list if it wasn't there.
So it's there.
Okay.
So to kind of recap, the next meeting we'll talk operating budget. So that'll be staffing as well as maintenance accounts as well as any contracted services. At the second meeting we'll talk capital, and then the goal is at the first meeting in June to have a draft of the budget to council. And this whole time back and forth if there's any inputs or things you're looking for, and then if all goes well, the second meeting of June for adoption.
Great. Questions? Thank you once again. You're doing an excellent job. Okay, consent calendar.
Thank you. Item number 1, warrants seeking approval of total expenditures for March 27th, 2023 through April 7th, 2023, totaling $1,144,669.04. Item number 2 is our housing element annual progress report, asking council to receive and file the housing element annual progress report for 2022 and direct staff to submit the housing element progress report to the California Department of Housing and Community Development. Those are only 2 items on the consent calendar.
Any questions, or is there a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve items 1 and 2.
Second. Okay, Mary, call for the vote, please.
Councilmember De La Rosa?
Aye.
Councilmember Lavelle?
Aye.
Councilmember Schickling?
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Ponce?
Aye.
Mayor Marshall?
Aye. Item number 3.
Item number 3, Bob Greenlaw will come up to the podium, but this is a contract assignment for the operations management, maintenance, and monitoring of the City of Avalon water system. We're asking council to authorize the city manager to assign the remaining term of existing agreement with Montrose Water and Sustainability Services, Inc. for the operation management, maintenance, and monitoring of the City of Avalon wastewater system to PERC Water Corporation, and then authorize the city manager to negotiate a contract for extension with PERC Water Corporation for up to an additional 3-year term. Bob?
Okay, so just a little background on where we were and where we're heading. So on December 17th, 2019, City Council authorized the renegotiated agreement for a 5-year period, and that ends on December 15th, 2024. And so that's the contract that we're under with Montrose right now. And unless that's terminated for a breach or a mutual agreement by City and Montrose Water. And so that's where we're heading. And so in early 2022, Montrose notified city staff of their intention to exit the water and wastewater service market. So staff were approached by 2 firms interested in the assignment of the remainder of Montrose's agreement. That was one was PERC Water Corporation, and then also Water Quality Specialists. After an informal interview and vetting process, city staff conducted a detailed analysis of the 2 firms and recommends assigning the remainder of the agreement and potential 3-year extension with PERC Water. PERC provided an executive summary, and that's in your agenda packet. This summary is intended to provide a short introduction of their corporate structure, ownership, capabilities, project approach, expertise, and how the transition would work. Tonight I have Mark Coleman of Montrose here in the audience if you wish to ask any questions of Montrose. And then I have Bob Napeska, which is also of PERC, and he's on Zoom with us. So he can ask any you can ask any questions of him pertaining to what their vision is to take over this contract. So any questions of me first, or any questions of those 2 contractors?
Of course, I have a question. Is there anything sexy that can be done with this whole wastewater treatment if they've been in the business? And is there anything going out there that's kind of innovative that could be helpful?
Yeah, we can ask Bob what he could provide that info. But yes, that's one of the things that PERC brings to the table. They have, I think it was 75 different contracts with, all across the state. And so they have a depth and breadth of not just operating this, but improving these systems. And that's what they're going to bring to the table. And that's really the vision as we move through, is both the reclaimed water, and they're very involved in that.
Right. Okay.
But also upgrading and rehabilitating our plant and our facilities there. There's considerable funding that's available, state and fed, and then also there's considerable grants that if you don't get all of that, grants and loans. So if you don't get all the grant money in a grant, then you would be able to potentially borrow in a long-term, low-interest loan.
Yeah.
And those are available too. So as we move forward, and that's what we're doing with the reclaim study, and then also for the reclaim study, we were moving forward to look at the back end of that, what would we need to rehabilitate the plant. And PERC would say they would be very well involved in that.
Okay. Bob, did you want to make any comments?
Yes, good evening, Madam Mayor and members of council. Thanks for having me tonight. Can you hear me okay?
Very well.
Yes.
Oh, great. Okay, good. Bob, thanks for that introduction. I appreciate it. We were going to start our services here in the next 6 to 8 weeks with a facility evaluation. So once we've completed that, we'd like to come back to you with any recommendations that we can come up with. We do this regularly. We do it all the time. We currently operate about 27 facilities here in California and Arizona. And But it's hard for me to say at this point in time. I really need to get in with my staff and do an evaluation of the facility, how it's running, the equipment we're using, all of the things that I'm sure you have thought about in the past. But I promise you that I'll be back with a clear evaluation of, and maybe some recommendations on some savings.
Okay, great, thank you. Good questions? Council?
The only question I had was just in regard to your experience with either cease and desist orders or taking over locations that have had cease and desist orders previously, and just what your experience is with that, and if you have anything that you can speak to that you guys have done in the past with that.
I think that question was for me, and I apologize, I couldn't hear it.
Sorry,
My
Bob.
sound is probably not as loud as it could be.
Yeah, I was just asking if you and your team had previously either operated locations that were under a cease and desist order, a CDO, or if you had taken over locations that had been under orders like that, and what your experience was with those.
In fact, we have, unfortunately, many cities in California are operating under a CDO right now, or violations, and it's kind of what we specialize in. We come to your site, we take a look at things like that, we work with the regional board, we work with the city staff, and we try to bring all of those CDOs to closure. You want to get them off your plate for sure. So we have a good amount of experience with that. We've helped a number of cities. We've actually worked with one city in Ventura County that was the single greatest violator in the state for several years. And we were able to get them back into compliance through building a new facility and taking on the operation. So the answer is yes, absolutely. We look forward to it.
Great, thank you.
Any questions on, Devin, anything coming through?
No, ma'am.
Okay. Well, if there are no questions, council?
I'll make a motion to authorize the city manager to assign the remaining term of agreement with Montrose Water and Sustainability Services, Inc. for the operation, management, maintenance, and monitoring of the City of Avalon wastewater system to PERC Water Corporation. And number 2, authorize the city manager to negotiate a contract extension with PERC Water Corporation for an additional 3 years.
I'll second.
Move in second. No further discussion? The vote, please.
Councilmember De La Rosa?
Aye.
Councilmember Lavelle?
Aye.
Councilmember Schickling?
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Ponce?
Aye.
Mayor Marshall?
Aye. Thank you. Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Montrose.
Thank you very much, everyone. I look forward to working with you.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, item number 4.
Thank you, Council. Item number 4 is a request for a contract assignment for the semi-exclusive shoreboat franchise and shoreboat services provider agreement. We've been requested by the contractor to consider a request to assign the remaining term in the semi-exclusive shoreboat franchise agreement with Catalina Coastal Tours LLC to Catalina Coastal Shoreboat Service LLC and provide direction to staff. And we have Captain Scott here to speak on this.
Great, thank you. I don't know if you wanted to make any opening remarks?
Yeah, certainly.
Sure.
Sharon and I had made some decisions where it was the time that we're going to go ahead and depart from the shoreboat service. As that occurred, we had several different organizations that actually approached us. And so with the commitment that we've had with the city in ensuring that, you know, we provide a good provider for the showboat service, we vetted through the groups. And the organization, which is Catalina Shoreboat Services, is a very qualified group of people. I actually have a long-term relationship with these gentlemen. They are actually the manufacturers of our current shore boats. So they have a lot of boat knowledge, a lot of history with not only federal contracts, state contracts. They just have a really good team of folks to be able to provide the service. One of my commitments in this transition is I will commit to staying here on the island and basically be their general manager and run this operation as transparent as possible, in the sense of this change should be invisible to the consumer. It's basically operating off of the same location, the float. The staff would all be in place, same vessels, same contract, same pricing. So pretty much very, very transparent to anybody outside of this room with the contract. They've definitely been very supportive. We've had a lot of discussions on the specifics. They've brought to the table that there is interest in improving the existing fleet as well. Being that they manufacture the boats, they would love to go ahead and do some changes, which may change the capacity of the passenger loads for the boats, as adding additional vessel. And then going into the next phase of it, there's the interest in potentially purchasing the end float so that those two contracts can be tied together. In speaking about that contract with the shore boat and the end float, when we took over the business back in 2017, a lot of you folks, I think really just Mayor Annie was here. So just to share this with you, if there's any concern about the end float and operating in conjunction with the shore boat, when we first got that contract, Island Enterprises owned the end float. And we were not allowed to operate off of that because it was a different company. We actually operated for 3 years consecutively off of the middle float in the one that's being installed May 1st. And we were fortunate enough then to get the end float contract, which we bid. Those two contracts are very, very separate. They're not in conjunction with each other. In fact, the shore boat agreement is in 5-year increments, and the end float is in 2 10-year consecutive terms. So eventually, to align those contracts may make sense, but right now, what we're looking at now is that we have a 5-year contract which has 4 years left on it, and I still have the end float. So I have no intention of not permitting them to operate on the end float. The end float is very pivotal with that shore boat in the sense where we relieve congestion in the harbor. That's always been our goal with the company, is to ensure that we do not impact the congestion in the harbor. So we will absolutely operate solely off of our end float during the summer months.
And so, and then there's a, I don't know if it matters, there's also a jet ski operation that's going to kind of go in and out of there as well?
We currently operate the ticketing office and signing of the waivers out of the end float for the past 3 years.
Yeah.
And then we utilize the shore boat service to transport then the customers out to the jet ski barge.
Okay, and then there's going to be a Parasail business as well?
In our last council meeting, we had modified the Catalina Coastal Tours harbor use permit,
Right.
which allowed for us reducing a vessel. In fact, we're reducing 2 vessels, adding 1 vessel in, which is going to be the Parasail vessel.
Okay. Council comments or anything?
The only question I had, Scott, was the team that you're looking at having take over the shore boats. There wasn't a significant amount of, usually for this type of thing, there's the RFP that everyone goes out after, and we get a great amount of financial information and a plan for the business and that type of thing. And that wasn't necessarily fully explained with this information. And so that was my only question, was if we could get something like that, that would be explaining more a little bit about the current business owner and their financials, and then what their plan is also if and when they take over the business from you. And then you mentioned staying on. How long were you thinking of staying on for general manager until?
I've committed to the end of this year.
The end of
to stay
2023?
on, and it can be extended based upon if I cannot find my replacement.
Okay.
But I want to adequately train them.
Yeah.
As for the incoming group with Magpie and Catalina Coastal Services, Shoreboat Services, they have a long background of, we were talking retired submarine captain, also operations in Pearl Harbor. So there's a lot of boat yards, boat manufacturing.
I was impressed by their activity within both being veterans and serving veterans, which was really
Right.
cool.
So from a financial standpoint, I would have to digress to them to give the specific on the financial, but I can tell you that they own multiple companies all over the world. And
If I could, when I look at the shoreboat agreement, it does include a substantial subsidy from the city, and that is based in part upon the revenues and the financial conditions. Is it your intention that this subsequent operator would also get a subsidy, the same subsidy?
any operator, be it myself or anybody coming in, if you had to put this out to bid, is going to need a subsidy. This business cannot operate year-round without that subsidy.
I don't know if I'm ready to make a decision on this tonight. I think I would like to see the operator that he's suggesting go through and fill out the information that we would normally get on an RFP, just so that we have the background from them. I trust what you're saying, but also want to make sure we're doing our due diligence, because it's such a significant amount of money that we would be providing to them, and trust that they're a great operator, but just also know that we haven't seen them operate in our harbor yet and haven't seen their plan for what they plan to do down the road after you're gone.
Well, and the operations aspect will fall under my belt. And
Right.
as the operations manager, they would be at the financial support, and the overall, company that would be owning the shore boats. But I will say they did apologize for not being able to join today. They did. Larry actually did come out to the island on Sunday.
Okay.
We had an opportunity to meet with directly with the harbor master, so there were some introductions done. We met with the city manager. We were fortunate enough to meet with Mr. Baker a little bit, just in passing, as well. So.
If it's the council's prerogative, we can supply, Scott has it, but we can give the RFP that was asked for extensive information from the operator. If you recall, that this did go through 2 RFPs. And so we could give that RFP and just say for informational background, the council can make an informed decision on this transfer.
Right.
Which is doing it without an RFP, that we could ask that some of that the information requested in the RFP be supplied by this new operator, so that you could really understand the operations and also the plan for operating, taking over the next 4 years.
May I suggest, if we do that potentially this could reset the contract date? Because this will obviously push it back a bit, for the 4-year term. If they're going to go ahead and fill out an RFP for it for full review, it seems like it would be in their best interest to ensure that they have a 5-year and not a 4-year agreement.
We would consider that that's a council view, but again, when you're asking at a substitution of the agreement, so we can look at those terms, and everything is subject to, agreement, negotiation, clarification.
Sure.
And we don't need anything necessarily from Scott that we can think of. I'm just throwing it out there. On Scott's side of the business? No, we're good?
I think you're looking at the RFP, and then I do think that you're going to want to look at some assurance from Scott as the operator as the owner of the end float, that this new operation will still have access to that, because that's important. And then in addition to the RFP, perhaps if they're taking over this, what's their business plan? And maybe in the RFP, it's been years since I read that, but if they want to take over for the next 4 years, maybe include in the information that we're requesting what their business plan is, so that the council can evaluate whether this is, great for the next 4 years. How is this going to impact citizens? And we can get that information for you this week, and it's just a matter of how quickly you can and the new operator can give that information to the
Certainly.
council, and we can expedite this.
That'd be great, so it doesn't have to go to May 2nd or something to that effect. It could actually.
It just depends on
fast
how
we can get-
quickly
Yeah, we get the information.
the information, yeah.
Okay.
I think we're talking weeks versus months, right?
Weeks is much, yeah, the latest would be early June, but we've got 2 meetings before then, but, yeah.
Certainly. Well, I know that they it expressed in our personal meetings that we had, they're definitely coming in with a long-term outlook and looking at other opportunities that they could be, work with the community to grow different aspects of the harbor specifically.
So when they move in, they really aren't going to be paying to rent space on your.
There would not be a specific rent.
Okay.
There would be a maintenance fee.
Okay.
Because the end float is very expensive to store, transport, set up, maintain. So I wouldn't call it a rent.
And they're aware of all of those numbers?
They are.
Yeah, okay. Do we need to see those kinds of numbers? I'm asking that question, I don't know. Scott?
As part of, we would like to, well, again, part of it is if we're looking at extending it for another year, and that involves a subsidy from the city, you know, in the agreement that is before you and in the RFP, there was a justification for that subsidy.
Okay.
So as much information as we can get as to why there's a continuing need for this subsidy would be welcomed, and I would be strongly encouraged.
One of the largest aspects is labor. Because as I was sharing with the city manager, the wintertime is very slow, doesn't cover the captain's wages. If we were to shut down in the winter and not run full year round, I think we'd have a tremendous issue with employee retention, as well as I think a lot of the stores on Front Street that get that small amount of business in the winter, if we did not run in the winter, would have a real hard time with that as well.
So how many boats do you have available in the high season?
3, we have 1 12-pack boat and 2 6-pack boats.
And so, when you live here, you know it's a seasonal town. And employment can be seasonal, and everybody's aware of that. So in the wintertime, is it feasible just to run like the 1 12-pack and alternate operators?
So we actually, in the winter months, we run 1 boat per shift. So we do reduce down from the 3 boats to the 1. We are operating from 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. every single day. There are some days that we'll have, you know, maybe $200 or $300 in rides on a winter day.
Sure.
So it does get rather expensive with insurance and fuel and so forth. But we do reduce it down to 1, and we also reduce our staff down. We do have several staff that come in during the summer, and we probably reduce it down almost 60%. So that's just to maintain the 40% that's left over to be able to do the service in the wintertime. And now we're in the phase of where we're ramping up for the summer right now, so hiring captains and getting them trained. And of course, there's always maintenance that we can do on land and getting end floats ready and so forth.
Thank you.
Certainly.
Any other questions, or? Okay. Okay, that sounds like there's a request to get the sample RFP to them and work with the new operator, potential new operator, and come back to us.
Yeah, I'll work with the city manager on sending the copy of the old RFP and any additional questions based upon what the council's increase have been tonight, and we'll get that over as soon as possible. And we'll try and, again, part of it will be how long it takes to get back and anything, but, you know, this is not meant to take months.
Yeah, and thank you. Just more information would just give a, you know, a fuller picture.
Certainly.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
very much.
All right. And item number 5.
Item number 5 is the first reading of an ordinance amending Chapter 4-4.1703 of the Vehicle Code, setting a date for mandating electrification of commercial autoettes. And recommended action is to introduce and waive all further readings of an ordinance of City of Avalon amending 4-4.103 of the Avalon Municipal Code, setting a date for mandating electrification of commercial autoettes. 2, adopt a resolution waiving registration vehicle hearing fees for commercial autoettes converted to electric in advance of the January 1st, 2024 deadline for a period of 3 years.
Thank you for bringing this forward.
So I buy an electric commercial autoette today, right, in advance of 2024. And I don't understand, oh, and we waive those fees for 3 years?
For the next 3 years.
Okay, so the sooner they get it, the less it's gonna cost them.
So that's an incentive to convert to?
Do it sooner.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we want to give everybody enough time here, and that's, we're sent January 1, 2024 as the start date for the requirement, so in order to incentivize that, we'd be willing to waive 3 years of fees if they do it sooner.
I have another question. What happens to their old one? Are we gonna allow them to resell them? Or do we want those off the island?
We request how it's being disposed of, whether it's being transferred, sold, or moved off the island, so that, it depends.
I mean, there's nothing we can say to like, okay, but you can't sell them, you just gotta get them off.
I mean, our goal, we'd love to get them off. I mean, we know
Yeah.
that our goal is to reduce the number of vehicles that are sitting on the streets idle.
Okay,
Can we
well,
help them get them off the island?
it's free to get them off.
Right, okay.
So how about if they surrender that vehicle, what other incentive can we give them? So that it's not resold on the island? Just a thought. Give them $500? I mean, I don't know. We want them gone. We don't want somebody else to inherit them.
Right, so we're telling them that they have to convert to an electric vehicle.
No,
No.
we're telling the new ones.
New ones.
New ones for
And it would
commercial.
bringing a new commercial vehicle, golf autoette, is required to be electric.
Okay, so kind of like the case that we had before us before.
The case before us before.
That was, Eagle Electric. So
Yeah.
he wanted to bring an electric
Yeah.
vehicle. So anyone wanting to get a new vehicle, a new commercial autoette, we're saying it has to be electric.
And that you can only have one autoette per resident.
We're talking commercial only though.
This is commercial, yeah.
Actually, it's residential too.
That's what this
Well,
says, commercial.
This is commercial.
This is only commercial.
We're just
The
addressing.
next step is gonna,
And
Okay.
the reason, part of the reason we're doing that is because a requirement for a commercial autoette is off-street parking, which we don't get into the street side charging.
Right.
So we're trying to address the electrification easiest.
Well, I think somehow they need to get rid of that and not be able to resell it to somebody else.
What's the
Right.
current number of commercial autoettes? Is it 208, I thought it was, or what was the last one?
I don't, I just
don't
saw
remember.
that.
But I'm just thinking though, Annie, when you go to buy a new car, you always want to trade in your old one, because buying a new vehicle is, expensive. So you either sell your vehicle yourself or you trade it in with the dealer or whatever like that.
Right.
So in that regard, it would be difficult to say, well, buy a new one, but you have to surrender your old one.
Yeah, that's tough.
You know what I mean? People would go, well.
Well, they have to get rid of it in one way.
Would it make
Definitely.
sense to say if you are willing to replace it before the 2024 deadline, that you then get those fees waived for a period of 3 years? If you are replacing it and moving it off island, then it's a period of 5 years. That's an additional 2
Yeah,
years.
if you
for an
surrender
incentive to
your old
surrender it.
vehicle, we increase that incentive 2 more years?
And would that be horribly negative financial wise for the city to not collect those fees?
Matt?
A couple things. First of all, we have 198, the number's 198 total commercial autoettes.
So close.
Yep, you're right there. So 198. I think that the registration fees on commercial vehicles is not going to make or break us. See Matt sitting back down, so he's not panicking.
Unless we increase those at some point along the way.
True, but so I think the value of incentivizing somebody to actually get the old vehicle off the island is worth it. It's something we've been working at for the last year, so I'd like to keep doing that, so, sure.
I'd be okay with amending that to that. So 3 years if you do it before the 2024 deadline, 5 years if you are also removing the vehicle from the island.
I like that idea.
Okay, but let's ask another question. It takes forever in some situations to get those electric vehicles. I don't know
Is
if,
it intent to purchase or
yeah, I mean, it took
proof of
it took my neighbors 11 to 12 months to get an electric one. Now, some people
I think that's just for all
to
golf
buy them
carts right now.
from buying them locally. When people go over town, they can get them quicker, but then you might have a problem with maintenance. So,
I think the 2024 deadline is too soon.
I guess I'm thinking maybe it is, because if I ordered one tomorrow, by the time we get the word out, the ordinance goes into effect, you're probably looking at,
Yeah, I was surprised by that date.
yeah.
But
I forget, a while ago, there was a vehicle amendment that we were doing, and we dealt with this issue by saying that if you presented proof of
That it was ordered.
that you had purchased one.
Okay.
And it's based upon the purchase, not the delivery date.
That's, okay, I like that
So we
too.
can do that to fix it.
Okay.
that sounds good.
Okay. And then the 2 years extension. Now, let's get back to another thing, though, about size of those commercial autoettes. We
About
have
what?
the size of
Size.
those commercial, those electric vehicles are bigger. Some of them are a little bit bigger, and I don't have a problem with that because they're going electric.
No,
Yeah,
because we're now going to get us in sync with the state's gonna get in sync with what we've already allowed.
Right.
So if we go any bigger, we're gonna have to do it again, and I don't wanna have to go to the state again
Okay.
to do that.
Yes, okay, so let's use Jackson's, for example. His was
73.
173.
Well, if it was, then it's way beyond the size of an Autoette, and he would not be able to get that plated as an Autoette with the
So
state.
there are two definitions in play. There's an autoette, which is which is 130 inches, and then there's the low-speed vehicle / neighborhood electric vehicle, and that's 138 inches. So there's two different definitions, and those are the definitions recognized by the DMV.
Okay, 138. Okay, so if somebody like him could cut that down somehow or whatever, I have no idea, but.
We don't want to
okay.
hear about
Well,
that.
maybe it wasn't
Yeah.
173. I do remember
What?
it being, I do remember it being 16 inches over the max
Right.
allowable. So maybe it was
So
156.
his vehicle was 146 inches.
Oh, 46.
It was 146 inches, so it's 16 inches larger than an autoette. A neighborhood electric vehicle, in addition to the vehicle being electric, there are other qualifications it would have to meet
Right.
to be that. So
And
it's
then
not
you
just it's electric, it's neighborhood electric.
So, okay. Because like that vehicle that Laura Van Sickle got, or whatever her last name is now, that little vehicle, that was a low.
That's a qualifying vehicle,
Yeah,
yes.
okay.
It's a designation provided by the DMV, so they would have to register the vehicle with the DMV as a low-speed neighborhood electric vehicle.
Okay.
But is a commercial autoette considered a low-speed
Uh,
neighborhood?
Depends on what.
It would depend on how the DMV recognizes it. So if it's just an electric golf cart, it should be 130 inches.
Okay.
So to deal with the delivery problem, we can deal with that on the enforcement of the fees and stuff, but in the ordinance itself, we're gonna just amend it to be fair to people. This is effective January 1st, 2024, all new commercial autoettes purchased must be certified electric vehicles. That way, if someone purchases it, but it takes them, if
Hasn't
someone
been
purchases
delivered.
it now, but
Yeah.
it's not delivered until January, we're not saying
Okay.
you can't have it.
Purchased in full, or maybe they just have to put a deposit down. I don't know what people require, whatever the.
Purchase is a purchase and
Okay.
sale agreement.
Okay, but if I'm gonna buy one, it's gonna take me a year, am I gonna give them the $12,000 up front and let them sit on my money for a year?
But no, you're gonna be paying for it until
Until I get it. I
you get it. So you've bought it, you're just, and.
No, but is that true? No, if I'm waiting for a car, I don't pay full value for a car if I
But
don't
you've
have it
entered
in my
into a
possession.
purchase agreement, and it's not your fault if it can't
Okay.
be delivered.
Purchase
within the time.
agreement then,
Right.
not just
Yeah,
purchase.
purchase agreement.
Yeah, okay, just purchased it, didn't.
Well,
Okay.
and so what if somebody goes before the vehicle review board for a new commercial Autoette sticker and it's not electric? Is the vehicle review guy gonna just say, forget it, you can't have this?
Right, yes.
Correct.
So,
After January 1st.
so no mas, no more gas ones.
Right, okay.
Does
Commercially,
this tie into the bill that Josh Lowenthal's working on?
Just with the length.
Okay.
Oh, the
Right.
130
Yeah, he's-
inches,
Yeah,
yes.
he's going to
Yes.
130.
Okay,
I would move to introduce and waive all further readings of an ordinance of the City of Avalon, amending Chapter 4-4.103 of the Avalon Municipal Code, setting a date for mandating electrification of commercial autoettes, and adopt a resolution waiving registration and vehicle hearing fees for commercial autoettes converted to electric and/or with a purchase agreement in advance of January 1st, 2024 deadline for a period of 3 years, and add an additional 2 years of fees waived for removing the vehicle from the island.
yeah.
And the agreement, the language in the ordinance goes say all new commercial autoettes, all purchase agreements entered into for commercial autoettes must be certified
Blah, blah.
on that date.
Agreed.
Cool.
So moved.
I think this is wonderful. Thank you for bringing this forward. Thank you. Okay.
I'll second.
Moved and seconded. Excuse me.
We call for it?
You're gonna call for it?
She knows, we got a second. She
So they
knows it.
they still have to be 130 inches, that's max.
Right now, yeah, or when that's
Are
approved.
Unless,
there any-
unless,
Are there any
unless they
comments?
register it with the DMV as a low-speed neighborhood
It has to be
vehicle.
able to be registered with the DMV.
And
Right.
then you said the max of that is 138.
Will be 130. Oh, with
No,
the other
of the
one.
low-speed
other one.
commercial
Yeah,
things.
exactly.
So,
Okay.
Was there anything else to,
No, sir.
Call for the vote.
okay then.
Councilmember De La Rosa?
Aye.
Councilmember Lavelle?
Aye.
Councilmember Schickling?
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Ponce?
aye.
Mayor Marshall?
Aye. You know, I feel really good about getting this accomplished, because so much stuff seems to take so much time, but this is like, bam, get her done.
Right?
Yes. Until next week, next council meeting, and people start coming out of the woodwork going, what the heck you doing? But for now, it's looking good. Okay, we are going to be going into closed session.
Yeah, we have 2 closed sessions. We have conference with legal counsel, existing litigation, SEIU Local 721 versus the City of Avalon, as well as the City Council acting as the housing authority for conference with real property negotiators at 120 Marilla Avenue.
That's good, here we go. Okay, we are back from closed session. City Attorney?
No reportable action.
Okay. Good night, Tony. Meeting adjourned. Yes, and we'll see you on the 4th of July.